Welcome to the second episode of Until We Meet Again, which is hosted by myself, Jeremy Murray, and my colleague, Evelyn O'Sullivan from the Cork Convention Bureau. You might notice we've made a few changes since our first episode, as our backgrounds have gone from red to blue, and I also have a lot less hair after my first trip to the barbers of the year. For those who haven't seen our first episode, at the Cork Convention Bureau, we promote Cork internationally for business tourism, which includes meetings, incentives, conferences, and other corporate events, as well as helping to secure this business for the Cork region by supporting individuals or organisations who want to host an international event or conference here in Cork. As everyone knows, this world of meeting and events has changed massively over the last year and a half, and we've all had to become acquainted with the likes of Zoom, Teams, and letting people know when they're on mute. And as we approach the return of in-person events, we thought it might be a good idea to sit down and have a virtual chat with those involved at different stages of the business tourism journey to find out what are their takeaways from this whole experience and how they see business tourism changing going forward.
Okay, hello everyone. Evelyn O'Sullivan here, as Jeremy introduced me. So if you're with us for our second episode, thanks for coming back. And if this is your first listen, then welcome. And I suppose please bear in mind with us as we're learning on the job. That's one positive about the COVID pandemic. It has given us all the opportunity to try out different marketing formats and develop new skills. I'm definitely not suggesting myself and Jeremy give up the day jobs and apply to RT, but we're enjoying re-engaging with and having chats with our conference ambassadors very much. So who are our conference ambassadors? These are all of the amazing Cork individuals who have put up their hands and decided to bid for an international conference to come to Cork. We've been running our Conference Ambassador Programme since 2010 in conjunction with Fáilte Ireland Business Tourism Unit. Fáilte Ireland have identified that each international delegate is worth 1,600 to the local economy. So you can easily see why international conferences are big business. Unfortunately, as we all know, this international tourism into Ireland has been non-existent for the last 14 months. However, we're already bidding for new business from 2022 and already have some on the books up to 2024. And we look forward to very much being part of the regeneration process. So anyway, back to today's episode. We are our second interviewee, actually our second interviewees, I should say, who we will hear from now are Dr. Niall Smith, Head of Research at Munster Technological University, MTU, formerly Cork University, Cork Institute of Technology, CIT, and also Head of Blackrock Castle Observatory. And Niall is joined impromptuly, if that's such a word, joined by his colleague Elizabeth Carroll-Twomey, and we're delighted to have you here with us and join us as well today, Elizabeth. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Niall, just over to yourself first, yourself and your team, especially Elizabeth from MTU with you here today, and not forgetting to mention Claire from Blackrock Castle. You first came to our attention when you were organising the International Space University 9-week Space Studies programme in Cork in 2017. And you then went on to bid for and secure the UC, European Space Engagement Conference for Cork, which was planned for last year, but unfortunately the COVID pandemic had other plans and this had to be postponed. I suppose I know the answer myself, but I'm very interested for you to tell all our listeners where your knowledge and interest in the space sector stemmed from and how it fits with your overall research role at MTU.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. So my interest in the overall space sector really goes back to the first landing on the moon, which is now 50 years ago. And when I got interested first in it, it was very much about exploration, about reaching out into the unknown, developing new technologies, pushing new boundaries and frontiers, and very much looking outwards. What's really kept me interested in it all these years is that as we've developed more technologies to go out into space, we've been able to align them towards helping with our activities here on the surface of the planet. So a lot of what we take for granted in our daily lives now is only possible because of satellites that orbit above us, mostly invisibly, not always. And the future that we can take from those satellites, particularly ones that have started to be launched by companies that some of us will be familiar with, SpaceX will be one of them, will be providing and have started to provide things like broadband into rural regions in a way that simply isn't possible with any other technology. So my interest and the interest from Munster Technological University is looking at how the development in space in recent years in particular poses enormous opportunities for both societal and economic gain for countries like Ireland. You don't have to be the US or Russia or China to take advantage of space. So it's an exciting time, and it's also a time that's open to everybody, from space tourists, if you want to go up, or engineers on the ground here who need to build the kit that might bring you up. So that's essentially where that interest has stayed and grown, if anything, Evelyn.
That's really interesting. And I know personally myself, when during the Space Studies program, that there was a couple of seminars that I realized, okay, this is actually bringing space down to our planet as such and on the ground. And I remember even there was a company, a soldering company or something in East Cork, and we're very interested, and they were in the audience, and they were talking about, using their facility, their services, I suppose, essentially in rocket making, I suppose.
Absolutely.
That's what I thought was the best thing about that program. And actually, just speaking about that original event, the ISU Space Studies program, maybe even Elizabeth could tell us a little bit about your experience. It was unusual from a regular conference or from a regular event, in that it was 9 weeks long program, which I'm sure brought its own challenges. Why do you think the attendees enjoyed Cork as the location so much, Elizabeth?
I'd actually think that it was, and it's not trite to say it, it is the Céad Míle Fáilte. It was that welcome. It was literally the looking after them from the moment before they arrived, in actual fact, the moment they hit here until they actually left. I'd say we didn't draw breath from the moment they arrived until they actually did, the closing ceremony in the county hall, as it was. The opening ceremony was in the city hall, the closing ceremony was in the county hall. We had support obviously from the city and the county, yourselves, and such a breadth of support across the city, I would have to say, across the campus here, and wider and beyond, across the country as well, from other colleagues that were involved in space. But definitely, I think, looking back, and even we were getting the feeling on the ground, they were telling us at the time that they couldn't believe how the welcome, how much they felt welcomed, how much they felt looked after by their, the two mammies down in Dean's Hall, making sure that they'd everything, and was their washing done and was it done properly or whatever. It was very much a hands-on experience, I think, from everybody. I don't know that they had that experience of being as looked after in other countries. I'm not saying ours was better or whatever. We certainly got fantastic feedback afterwards, but from the head of ISU as well, and beyond the faculty and that. But I do really think that they felt looked after and welcomed. I remember an incident where we had it was basically the alumni dinner, which was a big deal. They bring a lot of heavy hitters to that. They bring, some of their sponsors, big hitters from the States, and that over, and their wives were here, and they had been, I think one of the wives had been on the bus, and she just was wondering where to get off. So the bus conductor told her, you get off at such a top, I'll let you know, don't worry about it, I'll let you know. So he told her, she got off, but unfortunately she went the wrong way. And they stopped the bus, they got out, and they told her, no, you're going the wrong way, it's this way. And she couldn't believe it, that was, that was the level of that they had been looked after and welcomed in Cork, in Ireland, and that, it was.
And that's just phenomenal. That's fantastic to hear. It really is. And, maybe sometimes we take that lightly and kind of take it for granted, but we also got similar feedback from another international wind energy conference, similarly about the bus drivers. And it's such a, it's a lovely thing as well, actually. So
it is. And I think for anybody, when you go away, I mean, for us, I think when we looked at the package, when we really, you approach it on a very practical nature. We're both very practical. I'm an incredibly practical person myself, and that's just the way I approach things. But at the same time, you kind of do think, if you go away, where you lie your head, kind of what you eat. All of those things are very important. You'll get over it for a few days. These were people coming for 9 weeks.
I
And
know.
7, doing a very intensive program from lecturing to, you know, working in departments, working in projects, traveling around the country, you know, having off-site visits and things like that, and then doing an exam in the middle of it, and then having to pull a really, really big project together in teams at the end of it, where they could have been working 24/7, and we gave them access 24/7, and actually here to our lovely architecture factory at the time, so that they could work and get some shut-eye, as it were, on and during the course of the day if they needed it. We had bean bags, we had sofas and everything out there so that they could have that facility. But when you have people here for that length of time, plus all of the sort of the extracurricular stuff that was happening, you know, the 18 public engagements, the 55 that ran out of Blackrock Castle Observatory. So they were going to all of those as well and they were, you know, delivering some of it themselves. They were on the ground, they were meeting people, they were learning all the time. But you really do have to come back to the basics of food and accommodation, and that are really, really important. And I tell you, we were hugely supported on campus here, and very much so down in Dean's Hall as well, and beyond. Anywhere they went, we had information through yourselves and through others as well. If they hired cars, if they hired boats, that some of them did down in Kinsale, they chartered yachts and everything. They went out and around the country. They were gone at the weekends, they were touring around. But we did, even through, you know, Cronin's Co-Chair and other sponsors that all helped us over the course of the time they were involved. They all really, you know, came up to the mark. They were all really hugely engaged, and they were all wanting to look after who they had on board their bus or staying in their B&B or hotel or whatever it was at the time. So all of that it matters. It really, really does. Not just the program that was being delivered. Of course, that's hugely important. But that we kind of felt that was up to ISU. The rest was us, you know. So
that's so great to hear, and it's, you know, I suppose it for us at Cork Convention Bureau, that's the reason we, you know, that we see so many conferences actually even returning as well, you know, coming back on a number of occasions. So it's great to hear that. And I suppose at this stage then, you know, despite all the challenges and the 9-week program, you had the conference bug and moved on to the UC European Space Engagement Conference planning. How did you find specifically the bid process, and did you feel there was adequate support available in Cork, in your opinion, for either of you guys?
UC differed in a little bit in the sense of from the space studies program, and that we were able to provide them with a certain amount of information which we had, and we obviously haven't been through the space studies program. We were, you know, you can speak off the cuff about it really, because it's ingrained to, you know, having run a program for so long or whatever, but there's always new and information available and to hand. That little bid process differed in the sense of it was more of an organic process. You put in an expression of interest, you're at the conference, and it's actually voted at the time at the General Assembly who will host it. So whoever's put in an expression of interest, you have to stand up and say your little piece about why you would like to bring the conference to Cork, as it were, for us. I think it was Madrid that year that it was voted in for Cork, and actually it's literally a hand-holding exercise, and that's you know, so it's actually very nice because it's not been down on paper and it's not been adjudicated in that manner. They get the feel for who you'd like to vote for on the day, and that was how it's done. But I think I showed a video, actually. I had the video that we had done for SSP, and so it showed Cork and the coastline and the city and the facilities that we had here, and it's to go to the School of Music and that as well, which is where we were to host it, to have it in the city centre. So I think that kind of might have won them over as well, you know, the visual, just quite.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And did you think, I suppose, even in terms of, you know, as I said, the various supports available through ourselves in Fault Ireland, are they a good help for people like yourselves?
Absolutely.
When you are looking?
Absolutely.
And thinking,
I think certainly putting in, you know, sort of a written bid, a formal bid, especially if you have sort of that validation and you have, you know, you have the support of organisations such as Portfolio and such as the Cork Convention Bureau, and you know that you have the city and that about you, because they want to know that. They want to know that if they're, you know, handing over such a big and important event to a university or an institute of technology or whoever the organiser is, you do need that backing as well, and you do need that level of support, you know, more than what's on hand on site. You know, I think that's very important, actually. And as well as that, sure, I mean, just being able to ring up and say, you know, hello Anne, or hello Evan, or whatever, or send in an email and say, can we have rates for such and such or all of the city hotels, the county hotels, or whatever. I mean, sure, that's a huge bonus, a huge plus. I mean, that's, you know, that's very time consuming, and when you have that in from the Cork Convention Bureau into the likes of any of the city hotels, to be able to get a specialised rate or something like that, and not to have to forge that relationship if you know, if you're not as familiar with that particular hotel or so many of them, that's very important. So I mean, I remember the time where you sent out all the details of the convention centres, where we were looking at very large businesses everywhere from down to Ballymaloe. Was it the barn or whatever is down there?
Sure, yeah,
there's such a breadth of places around, and that, you know, I mean, Páirc Uí Chaoimh coming on board, that as well as being another venue as well, that's, you know, that's added to the mix, I suppose, in recent years. The event centre, I suppose, if that came along at some point, that would be hugely helpful, hopefully,
exactly. Yeah,
when we're
that's
back to meeting in person. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, well, we're delighted to hear all of that. I'm going to let Jeremy jump in there now and ask some questions.
Yeah, thanks Evelyn, and thanks Elizabeth. We love to hear that, and it's very interesting to hear about your experience in organising these events. Based on that knowledge that you've gained from that, from organising these events, plus what you're hearing from the UC organising committee and your other MTU colleagues, how do you see the future of conferences events going once large in-person events are allowed to return again?
Well, if I might take that initially, Jeremy, I mean, we're seeing a desire to do a more blended approach to conferences. So you could imagine that parts of conferences in the future will be in person. I don't think that that's ever going to go away once the possibility of travel is reopened. There's a whole series of things you can do in person that you simply can't do online. That interactivity, that ad hocness, the banter, the friendliness, the building up relationships, we haven't cracked that, and it's not obvious that you can crack that using technology in the same way that you can do it as you're just walking down the corridor to some sort of presentation or whatever. But what we're also seeing is that for some parts, maybe plenary sessions where the audience to be reached would benefit from being very large, and that could maybe help conferences to make sure that there's a lot of people here. So the key points they want to get across from the conference organisers, the conference organising committee. So we would see that is something that would be an online element added into an in situ event. What Elizabeth said is exactly right. You know, you remember so much about a conference based upon the people, the friendliness, the food, the accommodation, the place that you were. I mean, I can think of places that I have been to conferences, and I'm not sure I can remember what the conference was on about, but I can remember the places. And I think that's something that people still will want to do. And I think from a Cork perspective, that's perfect. You know, where instead of being something that's maybe slightly more difficult to get to than the Londons, the Paris, the New Yorks, now you can get here relatively easily. And if you want to open up an audience in South America to your conference, you can do that online as well, if they can travel to that particular one, and vice versa. So I think there's a real opportunity for cities in locations like Cork to open their doors and conferences to a much wider audience than heretofore. But going back to the thing, I think most conference goers will want to select a number of conferences where they will be there in person every year. And that's got to be exciting for the city. And with the likes of the Cork Convention Bureau, making it very clear, again, some comments that Elizabeth made about the range of options, the range of price levels that are available, the different types of accommodation. It's a small city where you can walk about very easily. It's a very safe city. This came across to us very loud and clear in all the conferences that we've been organised in. And then you throw in a bit of online as well. It's a perfect mix.
Thanks, Niall. That's exactly what we've been hearing as well. I think while the online does add a kind of a world of options onto the world of conferences, people really do want to get back to the in-person events. And when you are able to mix the two into a hybrid model, you kind of open up Cork to the rest of the world and to maybe larger events that maybe previously couldn't have ever considered Cork. But just moving on, one question which we wanted to ask you specifically was on the topic of dark skies tourism. Recently, at one of our online familiarization sessions, we heard from Rob O'Sullivan in Blackrock Castle, who spoke to us about the opportunity to develop this here. And as something we know is of particular interest to you, Niall, we are wondering if you could speak about the potential of dark skies tourism here in Cork.
Yeah, I'm delighted to say a few words on it, Jeremy. So first of all, the idea of a dark sky means slightly different things to different people. But really, from my perspective, from a tourism perspective, it's thinking about the large number of people who are reasonably mobile. So I guess, you know, people who can afford to travel. There's a large part of the world who aren't going to travel. So for the people who we can attract here, they generally will come from cities. They will generally come from locations where being able to see the skies is very challenged. There'll be a lot of light pollution. Cork is a perfect size. If you go a few miles outside of Cork, you can suddenly see thousands of stars. And for many people, this will be a transformational experience. I used to live just 6 miles outside of the city centre, and I could go out, and if I gave myself 10 minutes just lying on the ground, maybe on a sleeping bag or something, you know, it still transported me into a different arena. And it's really cost effective. So you don't need telescopes, you don't need observatories. What you need is simply a willingness to have people who can tell stories about the night sky, people who know maybe a little bit about pointing out where there's a planet or where there's a particular star or whatever, but really very modest levels of knowledge can make it from a visitor experience really exceptional. And while we do know that there are some extremely good dark sky areas where you'll see even more stars, it's probably a law of diminishing returns. So I think people might be thinking, oh, it's a little bit not so perfect where I am. And I think the conversation has to move around. Well, that's not going to be a problem for the vast majority of people who've never really looked up at the skies. So if you think about what's the investment in capital, it can be zero effectively. What's the investment in education? Very, very modest. Learn a few different bits and pieces. Suddenly, as a B&B owner, you can provide the opportunity of showing the night sky to people and pointing out a few things. And I can tell you categorically from friends and colleagues who've never had things pointed out to them, when you point out to them, they will say things, oh my goodness, I didn't realize you can see that. Oh, is that Jupiter? I didn't think you could see Jupiter. Little things like that, which don't take a lot of effort, and Cork is really well placed. If you're actually in Dublin, it's a much bigger problem. You have to go miles outside the city. It's a longer bus drive or whatever it is. It's a more time consuming. Here you can do it in a very short period of time. It's an advantage of being in a more compact city. And as a final comment, the government policies on this now for rural development include specific references to dark sky tourism. So I think now is the time for us to grasp this and really make it clear that the south of the country and Cork as a city destination to spend a few days, and then every now and again pop out into the countryside, get to see some of the skies above like your ancestors did. I think there's a really interesting tourism angle here to add into this. And I'm sure we'll see a lot of activity in that in the coming years.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that's really taken for granted almost by the people living here, that I suppose in the last year, while many of us haven't been able to travel abroad, I think people are really opening up to what's here in Ireland and what's all around them. And I think dark skies is definitely part of that, and something that we should look to develop and make use of as a great resource that we have. I've one last question. Where you both work in what was formerly Cork Institute of Technology, this has undergone a lot of changes in the past 12 months, a merger with Tralee, rebranding, and a new president. How have the changes been for you and your team, and what have you learned from this whole process?
Well, I think the first thing, and then I'll let Elizabeth say what she thinks as well. So a good way to finish off on the two of us, perhaps. But you know, there's anytime you merge two institutions, it's challenging. But anything worth doing has to be challenging. I like to think of MTU, where will we be in a year's time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time? The fact that we now have a university which is an anchor in an urban centre, so in Cork, and an anchor in a more rural area in Kerry and Tralee, gives us a world of opportunity in terms of understanding end users. So from people who are in finance to farmers, people who are working, you know, in the hospitality industry where there's a high density of people. So hotels where there's a large number of rooms, to people in small B&Bs or small hotels in rural locations and so on. So MTU has the opportunity to, it straddles both of those like no other university does in the state at the moment. So that's an interesting opportunity for us. In terms of the research, it's also an interesting, because that's my domain in particular, it's an interesting opportunity to see, when you think about it, half the world's population roughly live in cities, half live in rural areas. What are the challenges? What are the challenges of climate change? What are the challenges to do with environment? What are the challenges to do with broadband? I mean, we're using an MTU, we're testing out some of these low Earth orbit satellite devices to bring broadband instantaneously to various parts of Cork and Kerry. So there's all these technological revolutions. MTU needs to and has a determination to be at the forefront of it, changing both the rural and the urban landscapes. But it's not all going to be simple. It's not all going to be achieved overnight. And while we're getting there, we have to be smart and innovative and creative about the way we do it. And Elizabeth, maybe you would have some thoughts on.
Yeah, no, I suppose the word you said at the outset was challenging. I mean, at the end of December, we were still, you know, I won't say we went off on our Christmas holidays being CIT because of course we were still at home, but on the 1st of January, you could very much feel there was actually a difference all of a sudden. Well, maybe not the first, okay, we were on holidays, but once you came back after Christmas, there was a different feel even to your job, to the sense that we were now MTU. It did take on a different feel overall, to be perfectly honest. I suppose it's on the ground doing jobs. We were, as Niall said, we're two campuses in two different two different locations completely, but actually possibly with similarities, but then a lot of dissimilarities as well. I would say, you know, a lot of differences, and that can all be a good thing as well. As Niall said, something something that's a challenge. If you want to do it, that it's worthwhile doing it. I think it's probably opened up an awful lot of opportunity for us actually being MTU, because it's forced you to think in possibly a slightly different way. You know, CIT was CIT. We might have been very comfortable going along at CIT. You make little changes going on and here, and you know, improvements and things as you do go on. But I think if you're forced all of a sudden, almost at being a new institution, a new university, you know, you're upping your game straight off the bat, you know, and you're looking for that new angle on everything. So it's been a bit of a challenge, I suppose, from an admin perspective. Absolutely, it's added a whole layer of complexity from the get-go. That'll all peter out, and that will sort itself in time. It's just admin. It just takes time. I suppose earlier on there we mentioned the space studies program, and you know, we mentioned the fact that people would like to come back to Cork. I suppose we all have that feeling when you go somewhere and you enjoy it, be it a conference or be whatever event that you're attending, you will always get something out of it if you put in, I feel, what you get out of it anyway for the most part. And you always feel, oh, I'd like to go back here with my husband, or you'd like to go back and visit at another stage, or maybe there's a project or somebody you've linked up with that you've kind of clicked and said, really, there's a real opportunity here to collaborate and do something really worthwhile. But I do feel that people, you know, really did feel they want to come back to Cork. And we heard actually in person that they wanted to bring the space studies back. They've actually asked us, maybe it was before the pandemic, actually. It was actually, I think, probably in 2019, or was it early last year? But actually being MTU now will have a whole added layer, or a whole different set of experiences, you know, because having something like that, and that was something that was so unique, you kind of say, okay, if you do it again, how could you make it as special for people? But actually now we'll be MTU. So in actual fact, it could be very different again anyway. So it could be very special indeed, you know, going forward. So I always like to think, you know, change is a good thing. I think really it's not so much that you roll with it, but I do think it encourages different thinking, innovative thinking, as Niall mentioned there. And I think it allows everybody, or encourages everybody, up your game and take things forward. And I suppose we're just getting on with it anyway for now. So yeah, we're hoping to welcome some new recruits back to Cork at some point, in some capacity in person, and I hope that's sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That's just what we like to hear. And like I said earlier, with the hybrid model, it's kind of opens up a world of possibilities. These new things which are kind of you're unprepared for, but they come into your life and kind of change your thinking and open you up to things you mightn't have ever thought of before. So thanks very much, both Niall and Elizabeth, for
Thank you.
for the great interview you've given to us today. I'd like to say thanks to everyone who's watched so far. And as Evelyn said earlier, we're really enjoying using this format to reconnect with some of our conference ambassadors. And we hope that they might be interesting as well for some of the people listening. If you do have any questions about hosting conferences or events here in Cork, please feel free to contact us. And if you did enjoy this quick chat, make sure to look out for some of our other upcoming episodes. So for me, Jeremy, thanks for joining us.
And for me, Evelyn, until we meet again.